In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Memphian Tigers Podcast. I am Greg Gaston alongside Frank Bonner, Tigers football beat writer for the Daily Memphian, and Tim Buckley, the Daily Memphian deputy sports editor and senior writer. Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you?
And old guy with the pen. Doing great.
Well, we were all in St. Louis. We will talk about the Tigers' 34-27 loss to Missouri, now a nationally ranked team. We'll preview Boise State, which is Saturday's big game at Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. Then a little bit later on in the podcast, Tim and I will talk about Memphis Tigers men's basketball as practice is underway. Basketball is almost upon us, but we are in a very important stretch of football. And I thought personally the Tigers' very physical performance, which I like to see against Missouri. I think when it came down to it, just too many mistakes. Missouri is a strong team, obviously an SEC team. Nothing to be ashamed of. But, Frank, they're not into moral victories. They're not going to accept losses. I know they are disappointed that they didn't come away with a W.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, they've beaten Mississippi State in the past, 2 years ago. So they're kind of at that point where they want that locker room to expect to beat teams like Missouri. So obviously it's not a moral victory, but I think we talked about the last podcast. Coming out of the Missouri game, you just wanted them to look like they were in a position to be able to compete for a conference championship. And I think they did that. A 7-point loss against a Missouri team that is now ranked, like you said, it's nothing to hang your head about, even if you didn't win.
I think you're absolutely right. How did they look? And I was a little concerned going into this game because I know Missouri got a big physical offensive line and defensive line with guys that will certainly play on Sunday in the NFL. And coming out of that Navy game where I thought the Tigers didn't compete physically in the first half but did much better in the second half, I was concerned. But, Frank, I saw a physical game. I saw that was the good part. Again, mistakes really cost the Memphis Tigers. But from a physical standpoint, they battled with an SEC team. That's the way I saw it. How did you see it?
Yeah, I thought they hung in there. I thought Missouri controlled most of the game. Look, early in the fourth quarter, they had an opportunity to tie it up. But even then, at least for me, there was always a sense of Missouri, if they really pressed, could kind of score when they had to. I'm not going to say at will, but with relative comfort, because the Tigers' defense was just giving up, too many big plays. And Ryan Silverfield talked about that a little bit afterward. 2 interceptions for Seth Henigan. He was really kicking himself over one. There was a lot of things that they had to clean up, but I think it was a respectable showing. I mean, they didn't get their tails kicked like Arkansas State did at Oklahoma, losing 73-0 and get embarrassed or anything like that. It was a decent showing. You're missing your two top kickers. Tanner Gillis, the kid who came in, got his work done with a couple field goals and his PATs. It was a respectable showing, but again, I personally thought Missouri, they just seemed like they were in control for most of it, even though the Tigers kept it a game into the fourth quarter.
It was an ominous start. They try an onside kick. Missouri, it's successful, but a penalty brings that back. And then they hook up very early with Brady Cook going to Marquise Johnson. And you wondered if this was going to be the theme, Frank, of the game that they were just going to throw at will. And Brady Cook had a strong game. We were wondering how healthy he would be. He goes for 341. He throws 2 touchdowns. And Luther Burden is the real deal. 10 catches, 177 yards. But I thought that the defense, which was out there a long time, hung tough until fourth quarter, mid-fourth quarter. I think they got worn down, and then Schrader started to run on them. But early on, it was a wake-up call for Memphis because they weren't ready from the get-go.
Yeah, right. And to their credit, they did bounce back after Missouri threw that big haymaker. But, I mean, Luther Burden, it wasn't just the 10 catches that he had, right? It was the yards after catch that hurt him. I mean, it's one thing to let him catch the ball, but he's already catching a 10-yard pass, and then he runs for another 7 or 8. That's kind of the daggers that kind of prevent the defense from limiting Missouri's progression. Because if you look at the third downs, they forced Missouri 0 of 8 from third down. But
Unbelievable.
Then defensive coordinator Matt Barnes was like, yeah, but they only had 8 third downs. And he said that was the problem.
Do you think they were out of position defensively, or it was just a bad day of tackling? Burden was so quick, and he's zigging and you're zagging and you're missing the guy. But what do you think it was, or was it a combination?
Well, I think part of it is Burton found a way to pick his spots in the zone. There were pockets on the field where he could just kind of sit in and be open, and then once he turned around, there was green. They didn't have a body on him in the way that I felt they should have, because even if he catches the ball, it should have been a bang bang play. He catches the ball, he's on the ground. But when you have spots on the field where there isn't a guy near you for 2 or 3 yards after you even get the ball, that's where you kind of get into a situation.
Got to be an NFL receiver. At least he looked like it that night, but I think he's bona fide.
I don't know if they'll face a better receiver. They're going to face a good one against Boise State, but I don't think they'll face a better receiver. Tim, you mentioned the interceptions by Henigan. He's up to 5. His first 2 years, and that includes a freshman season, just getting acclimated to college football, he threw 8. Threw 8 last year. He's already got 5 through 4 games. He's thrown a lot of good passes as well. He goes well over 300 yards. Great pass late in that game as he hooked up with Kobe Drake, who made a nice catch between 2 defenders. But is there a concern that Seth is a little too inconsistent right now?
Well, I mean, a couple of them were just bad throws, but he's willing, and Silverfield, more than most people give them credit for, they're willing to take some chances. I mean, he's a number of the fourth down conversions that they've had, he's able to extend plays. And when you take chances like that, you're going to get picked once in a while. So is it a concern? Sure, it's always a concern. I mean, you want to have a clean sheet, and when you end up with 2 even against an SEC team, there's concern, but I don't think that's their biggest problem. I think that O-line still has some shoring up to do, both in pass pro and in run blocking as well. I think that'll be kind of a continuing thing to watch as the season evolves, is if there's improvement from the line, because that was one of the Silverfield's biggest concerns early, and I think that's something they still got to tamp down.
I'll ask both of you this, and on the surface, it seems like it's a simple yes, but I would like you to expound on it. Did they miss a golden opportunity here?
Yeah, obviously when you're that close and you had those opportunities to, put yourself in position to get a win, yeah, you miss an opportunity to get one more notch in the win column. But as far as an opportunity of what the goals are for the season, I felt like that was kind of what I call a free game anyway, because if you win, great. If you lose, not that big of a deal if you don't lose in a blowout, which they didn't. But, it is what it is. I think this Boise State game is more of an opportunity that they have to have as opposed to Missouri.
And we'll talk about that in a second. Tim?
They're where, and Frank mentioned this last week, they're where everybody thought they would be after 4 games.
Right.
They're sitting at 3-1 with the loss to an SEC team, but looking good enough to be competitive against both Boise and Tulane. When you have a chance to tie a game in the fourth quarter and you don't walk away with a win, yeah, that's lost opportunity. But it doesn't kill their season. And I wrote this, call a little flack for it. Big shock. It puts a damper at a minimum, if not kills their New Year's 6 hopes, I would think, because to get that New Year's 6 bid, you either have to have a clean sheet or a whole bunch of other people mess up worse than you did. And I don't know if the Tigers will go clean the rest of the way. So if you couple even one more loss, maybe somewhere in conference play, whether it's Tulane or whatever, and then the second loss, forget about it for New Year's 6.
I think one more loss, absolutely, you can forget about it. But I think right now, Frank, I think they're still fine. but it will take a run. You're going to have to beat Boise. You're going to have to make that run in the conference and not have any bad losses. And you're probably going to have to beat Tulane, get to the championship game, because I think Tim's right. I think 2 losses is going to be tough, but I guess it all depends on the other non-power conferences, if you will, and how those teams do. For example, James Madison is off to an unbeaten start. However, they're not eligible to be the New Year's 5 represent or New Year's 6 representative, because they are still in transition from 1AA. Do you feel right now that they're still in a good position, but one more loss does them in?
Yeah, I don't know about the one more loss, just because if you look at the group of 5s, right, the American, even after, not having Cincinnati and Houston and whatever, I think they still are the perceived best group of 5 conference, in the country at this point.
Right.
And you look at the Mountain West, right? You got a Boise State team that's looking shaky. They were the favorite to beat the Mountain West. If they beat Boise, that obviously, takes them out, and who knows who's going to ascend in that Mountain West. I think even another loss, if you beat Tulane and lose to SMU and still make the conference championship and you win that, I still think they get that bid for New Year's 6, because I just don't see what other team would be perceived as better than them in the rankings if they have the season that they're supposed to have. Because to your point, James Madison is out of the question.
Right.
And so who else is there? I mean, Fresno State, like who else is there who would take that spot from them?
It might come down to who wins the Tulane game, because if both take care of business the rest of the way, Tulane has a ding too with the loss to Ole Miss, because obviously when the quarterback was out, so that that hurt them. Like you said, Fresno. You kind of shrug your shoulders at Fresno. James Madison not eligible. I don't think Dolly Madison can get in.
You could end up beating Tulane a second time.
Yeah,
you could meet him in the championship game. By the way, if I had said group of 6, group of 5, of course, is what I meant.
Well, it could be 6.
With
the
Pac-2
and now the power conferences, right? They're down to 4.
We have no idea. And 2 years from now, it might be Power 2 and Group of 10. Who knows?
All I know is if Mike Resco was in here, he'd be going, "Shh, don't say that. Don't use group of this. Don't use non-power this." But here's the question: does Memphis have the team that could do this? Right? We all agree that one loss doesn't cripple them, but can they go on this run? So let's transition to this Boise State team. This is not the Boise State that beat Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl where Ian Johnson proposed to his girlfriend. They're not that good, but they're good. They're 2-2, and some people may look at 2-2 and go, they're average. They lost to UCF on a last-second field goal when they were absolutely dominating that game. Should have won that game. Should be 3-1. And their loss came against Washington. And right now, Washington is pummeling everybody. Michael Penix Jr. is a real candidate for the Heisman Trophy. So I take that one with a grain of salt. Boise State has been the staple, again, using the term group of 5, has been that staple for years. So I think there's a lot on the line here. I know it's non-conference. It doesn't do you in as far as making the conference championship game, which is the ultimate goal. But this is one where I think people look at Boise State. It's still a name. And if you knock Boise State off, that's a feather in your cap.
Yeah, and if you look, before the season, if you looked at the non-conference schedule, everybody would say that the biggest non-conference game was obviously Missouri. But I think for Memphis, the most important non-conference game was this Boise State game. Because you can argue that the Missouri game, Memphis is kind of punching a little bit above his weight class a little bit. It would have been nice to see them get that win, whatever. This Boise State game, this is a team you're expected to beat if you're trying to be the best group of 5 team in the country, right? This is that moment where it's like, can you take that step forward against a team that is in your weight class, perceived to still be a good team? And if they lose the Boise State game, then that's when questions about whether or not they can do this will start, surfacing, because this is a game they should win.
They should. And the Tigers have one thing in their favor, by the way.
Home field advantage.
Yeah, the turf is green, not blue.
Well, here's the thing, and we don't want to look at it from a negative standpoint, but you have to look at both sides when you're previewing games. They can win over a lot of fans with a win because people will realize that they are in a good position going into a Tulane game which will be after the bye week, a Friday night. I know you're going up against high school football, but I would expect a real nice crowd because people will look at that game if you beat Boise State and say 4-1. This is a team we got to keep an eye on. Let's support this team. You lose the game, whatever you have right now is in jeopardy because now all of a sudden it is, all right, yeah, they may still be able to make some noise in the conference, but they had 2 opportunities. Okay, we'll give you the Missouri loss, but you lost at home to Boise State when you've been a dominant home team, and Boise State came in at, people will look at it. They'll go, they were 2-2, even though they're good. So I think this is a crossroads game, Tim. This is an extremely important game. Doesn't mean if they win, they roll the rest of the way. But I think this is a momentum killer if they lose.
Oh, absolutely. And you kill the atmosphere for the Tulane game if you walk away with an L against Boise State. Because like you said, it is on a Friday night. And boy, if you think Thursday nights are a tough draw, Friday nights don't draw. I've covered some Friday night games. Friday night games in the fall, which most college football games are, you lose that whole high school crowd. Look, you're doing it for the bottom line. You're doing it for money. You're doing it because of the TV contract, and you're locked into having to do it, and networks need programming and all of that. But it's man, you take a loss on a Friday night, and what are there 17,000 there, 15,000?
And then it's the old, and I've been around a long time to hear this. Not recently, which has been great about Memphis football, but years before you were here, Frank, when it was, all right, it's basketball season. Mm-hmm. We turn our attentions completely to basketball. That has not been the case for the last decade. People are playing out, see what football can do while basketball starts. But in years past, and I'm going back again, it would be, all right, they're 2-2 or 3-2 or 2-3. Yep, let's get ready for the basketball season. That is certainly not the case. This weekend also is huge in the sense that there's going to be a ton of recruits there, but also they're going to be honoring the 2003 New Orleans Bowl team. Let me tell you something about 2003, and I know you've worked in Louisiana, Tim. Frank, going into that season, the Tigers had not been in a bowl forever, and football was a blip on the radar here. And in 2003, led by the great D'Angelo Williams and Danny Wimprine, and of course Coach Tommy West, when they became bowl eligible, it was electric for the city. And going to the New Orleans Bowl, not the Cotton Bowl, the New Orleans Bowl was one of the biggest accomplishments we had seen in a long time. The Grizzlies were here, but they were just starting out and struggled early on. It was a huge, huge moment. Now, of course, 9 years in a row, they've gone to a bowl game. People are taking that a little bit for granted. But my point is the 2003 team will be honored this weekend. So I think the team certainly, and I know that coaching staff wants to go out and honor that team by winning, by putting their best foot forward.
Yeah, and it's not just about winning the game. It's the implication of what winning this game means in terms of going into the conference schedule 4-1, everything still out in front of them, the momentum of people believing that they will be able to kind of have an electrifying season in the same way that 2003 team did if they end up winning this Boise game. I just think all that wrapped up is setting itself up for a good end of the game feel moment if they can get the job done. But one thing that they got to worry about with Boise is that Boise uses Ashton Jeanty the same type of way that Memphis uses Blake Watson. So they got to keep their eyes on that guy.
So I came over here to tape our podcast from the coaches meeting as I get ready for the broadcast on Saturday. So I had a chance to talk to the coaches. A lot of things, of course, I can't divulge here on the podcast, but I can tell you this, that they believe, Matt Barnes, the defensive coordinator, believes that Ashton Jeanty is not only the best running back they'll face this season, he says he's better than Tajay Spears, who did them in last year in New Orleans, the Tulane running back, who's now with the Tennessee Titans. That's how much praise they have for Jeanty. And Jeanty came into the season number 2 on the depth chart. So, Frank, you're right. This Jeanty guy, they get him the ball. He can run. He can catch out of the backfield. And he's kind of a bowling ball with speed, as guys will bounce off him. They have to tackle much better than they've been. They have to tackle low to get this guy down. If this guy's getting yards after, it's not yards after a catch, unless he's out there as a receiver, but yards after a carry as well. I guess it still is yak. If he's getting a lot of that, Memphis could be in trouble.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say about Jeanty that I didn't necessarily see in spirits, and I know it's only early, it's only 4 games, is that Jeanty, in the same way as Memphis's run game, has been inconsistent, right? If you look at the 4 games, one game he had 44 rushing yards, the next he had 115. After that, he had 43, and then last week he had 205. And so there is like an up and down production in the run game that I think Memphis can try to take advantage of in terms of if you kind of hit him in the mouth early, maybe you can kind of get him off his game and keep him off his game.
Well, that's a good point, but one of the games was against Washington, so a really strong opponent. He got 205 against San Diego State. San Diego State's not chopped liver. Right? Is that what you're saying last week?
Yeah, 205? Yeah.
That's a pretty good opponent on the road, too. So this guy has a lot to offer.
Well, yeah, he's definitely good. Like the talent is definitely there. And he has the potential to torch, any defense he plays. But I do think there is some, if you're a fan, there is some comfort in seeing that the production has been kind of up and down with, this Memphis defense. They're no slouches either. I know, Missouri put up 500 plus yards on them, but, they can get the job done. And so we'll see. And then on the other end, like Blake Watson needs to, this is a game where it could come down to Jeanty and Watson in terms of who has the better day. You want to see Blake Watson ascend himself because his run game production has kind of been up and down too. So it'd be interesting to see which one of those running backs has the better game.
Speaking of running backs, we know the shelf life on running backs is not the best. Tim, with a guy as good as Watson, you want to feed him as much as you can, but you can't go too hard with the guy. He's not the biggest running back in the world. You have Sutton Smith, who has not yet broken out yet, but you also have Jay Ducker, who is a bigger back and a stronger back. How would you, if you were in there dealing with Blake Watson as a coach, how would you deal with Blake? How many touches does he need to get when he seems to be the number one option on the offensive side for Memphis?
Well, I don't know, and I will answer your question, but before I do, I should note that in your earlier question to Frank, you left out the part when you were driving over here before you almost went halfway to Arkansas. Although I can't mock you.
Don't tell anybody.
I can't mock you too much, though, because I drove 27 miles on I-40 after missing the turn to I-55 before I realized, wait, St. Louis isn't this way.
No.
And I had to flip around.
But I'm going to blame it all on the construction.
Oh, yeah.
I got to blame it on somebody. Yeah. I've only been here almost 30 years, so I should know how to avoid not going into Arkansas. But anyway.
It's not necessarily number of touches for Blake Watson, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. It's how you do it. You can't wear him out just, pounding them through the tackles and getting them worn down and beat up, play after play after play. Get him on the edge, use his hands. He's got good hands out of the backfield, circle routes, maybe even, wheel route or something like that. Get creative with how you use them. Maybe even, a little shovel pass or something like that. And if you get him the right touches, not so much the volume, but you mix it up a little bit and you use him creatively, he goes a lot farther. And then don't forget the weapon that you have that obviously Rock Taylor is, because he had a heck of a game.
Big breakthrough game for him, Frank, Rock Taylor.
Yeah, he's having the type of season that everybody wanted him to have, taking that next step forward, being his 3rd year in the program. And so, tip your hat off to him for kind of what did Seth Henigan say? And he said that when the expectations are put on a player, mm-hmm. they're either going to shy away from it or step up to the plate. I'm paraphrasing that, and he said Rock Taylor has definitely stepped up to the plate, and so kudos to him for doing what everybody needed him to do.
And he had a drop early in that game, and I think it was his first drop this season. And then came back and had a really strong game, put up the numbers that we were just alluding to. 7 catches, 143 to be exact. That's 20.4 yards a grab. 20.4. That's what they need. They need that explosiveness. They promised us fireworks and explosiveness with this team. We haven't seen it that much, although we've seen Blake Watson explode. Couple of 60-plus rushes against Navy.
69 yards. Yeah.
And he's one of only a few in the nation that have done that. But we haven't seen a lot of tricks from Tim Cramsey's offense. We haven't seen a lot of reverses and double reverses and halfback passes. I know they tried to do one that didn't materialize recently. But for the most part, they've kept it close to the vest because they have seen some defenses that are a little bit different than what they expected. I think against Missouri, although not Missouri, but against Boise State, although a capable defense, you kind of know what they are going to bring to the table. And I think, and Tim had alluded to it earlier, with the speed, getting the edges, I don't think Boise can match them speed-wise. They can physicality, I think, will be a push. But speed-wise, I think Memphis may have the advantage. They have to get their athletes out in open space.
Yeah, and I think and honestly, I don't care how they do it. One thing I would like to see out of the Memphis offense that you didn't see against Missouri is back-to-back drives of getting in the end zone.
Yes.
Right? Like they'll score a touchdown.
Good point.
And they'll have the next drive will be flat or whatever. You need to see some consistency in their drives. And I don't care if it's a 14-play drive or a 3-play drive with 2 explosive plays, whatever it is, they need to have back-to-back series where they score touchdowns to kind of show that this offense can be consistent in a game.
Crazy little story from last weekend as we were all in St. Louis was the kicking situation.
Yeah.
Nobody knew that. We didn't even know that. In coaches' meetings, they didn't even mention that. And all of a sudden, this local product, Tanner Gillis, ends up having to kick and goes 2 for 2 with field goals and did very, very well with all his kicks, and he kicked off as well. And he's going to be thrust back into the action this weekend as the first team and second team kickers are both out for this game.
Yeah, right. And when that news came about, everybody was like, whoa, what's that going to do when they get in the red zone or whatever? And, I don't know if they had this game plan already or if the kicking situation forced them into being aggressive. But the aggressiveness on fourth down played out in their favor. I mean, whether it was 3 for 4 on fourth down. And so, and then when you needed to use Gillis, he kicked 2 field goals. It was a 43-yarder and a 22-yarder. And so he did what he was expected to do. And then the aggressive play calling on fourth down, I would like to continue to see that against Boise.
It impacted play calling. It impacted decision-making last Saturday. I don't think it necessarily needs to this Saturday because the kid went out and proved himself in terms of reliability.
So let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Boise State, Saturday, huge game. After that is a bye week, and then Tulane, and it's all conference play from that point on. Tim, what do you expect this Saturday?
Since you were talking about crazy story earlier with the kickers, before telling you what I expect, I'm gonna share a little, and I've actually shared this little anecdote with Frank before. I saw a game up in Boise once, back in another life when I was covering the Utah Jazz, and
so you've been to the Smurf Turf.
I've been to the Smurf Turf. Was watching from a suite that was open to the Utah Jazz traveling party, including several players who came over because they held training camp there for a week in Boise. And there were several players up there, John Stockton among them. All of a sudden, this young rookie, big old happy-go-lucky 7-foot Ukrainian named Kirill Fisenko, who had only ever seen football on television before, walks into the suite, looks down on the field, and says, "You play joke on Kirill." Thinking they had painted the field blue just to play a joke on him. But the even better part is they explained it to him and everything, and he was still a little skeptical, but he bought the whole story. And after maybe a series or two, he kind of opens his mouth again. He's looking down. He turns over to Stockton and some of the other ones, and he goes, "Where is yellow line for first down?"
Too much American television of football games, right? Watching the games.
What to expect? It should be a barn burner. I mean, I think it should be a good one. It should be a good atmosphere. It's 3:00 on a Saturday, in what is it, late September, early fall, whatever. I mean, early October, whatever the heck that is.
Yeah. Last day of September, technically.
Yeah, and a good 3-1 Tigers team, a bona fide deceiving record 2-2. Boise State team. Both of them have, good season possibilities on the line, even with the 2 losses for Boise. It should be a tight one.
And as I said earlier, before I get Frank's thoughts on this, I think it's a crossroads game. I think this is a pivotal game for the rest of the season to set it up with fan support, for the team's morale. They have been so good at home. Right? We talk about Boise State and the Smurf Turf, and they've taken advantage over that over the years, and they're known for that, but they also have meat to the substance. It's not just a football field. It's a program that has been very, very good for years. That's what Memphis is trying to become, and I think has over the last decade, but they have really taken advantage of that home field. So the importance of this game, it's not just any non-conference opponent. This is Boise State. You're at home. You need to win the game.
It's the start of a 3-game home stretch that's by far your 3 best games on the schedule. Well, I take that back. The Missouri game being in St. Louis, but the first home game in a 3-game stretch that is your best 3-game stretch of the season. So yeah, you got to go take care of business.
Yeah, and we talked about it last week that going into the Missouri game, that 3-game stretch of Missouri, Boise State, and Tulane was the most important stretch of the season. And I think we all agreed if you go 2-1, you're feeling really good about yourself. Mm-hmm. Well, now to go 2-1, they obviously got to win. Yeah, they obviously got to win tomorrow and then beat Tulane. And we'll talk about Tulane next week. But, Frank, your thoughts? Memphis is a 3.5-point favorite to knock off Boise State.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it, at this point, I still think that Memphis is in a position where they can compete for a conference championship. Well, there's no way I can believe that and not think that they're going to beat Boise. I mean, I think that that's where the bar is. So, like, yeah, I think that Memphis should win by a touchdown, honestly. A touchdown is still a close game, but I think a 7-point win should be in Memphis's horizon against Boise.
Isn't it amazing how those Vegas guys know spreads though? How do they know?
It's what they do.
And it's like close, right? Even if the spread is one way or another, like either they lose by 3 or they win by 4 or something crazy like that.
It was 7 last week and bingo.
They'll miss every once in a while, but not too often. So I know we don't have all the years and the records in front of us, but if you take out SEC opponents and conference games from a non-conference standpoint, this has to be the biggest game they've played in like forever. Am I missing somebody who they've hosted? I'm not talking about away games. I'm talking about at home, not anybody from the SEC or power conferences, and not anybody within the conference, a UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, all that. How much – you can't get much bigger than Boise State, can you?
Well, not just the opponent, but also the implication of what this game means for the rest of the season.
Right.
Like you throw all that in there, and I think you might be right.
But UTSA, of course now a member of the American Conference, they played them. It was all right. They're good, but it's UTSA. Nobody was doing somersaults over them. Of course, the result was Memphis dominating early, and then they got dominated and lost.
And nobody knew how good UTSA was going to be at that point in time. Like
right.
They had a good year
right.
after the fact, but nobody knew that.
Yeah, and Frank Harris was only in his 12th year that season.
Well.
There was that 1911 game, though, remember, against Rhodes, when Rhodes was out of conference?
The Memphis, what were they, the teacher school back then? But no, I look at the history of Boise State, and I look at this as one of the bigger non-conference opponents that they've had in a long time outside of, again, your Ole Misses and Mississippi States and SEC schools. I think it's going to be a barn burner. You expect higher scoring or lower scoring in this one? Offensive battle or defensive battle?
Missouri, Memphis scoring-ish.
So that was 61 total points.
Low 30s,
that was
high
what
20s.
I was going to say, about 60. If I don't know what the over and under is on the betting thing, but I would put it around 60.
He is Frank Bonner, Tigers football beat writer. Frank, great job. Next week we'll recap, hopefully a Boise State win for Memphis over Boise State, and we'll get you ready, even though it'll be a couple weeks away from the big Tulane game.
Yes, sir.
All right. Tim, hang in there with me for a second. We want to talk a little hoops for a few moments here on the Daily Memphian Tigers podcast, as basketball practice is underway and the anticipation for this season is palpable. We were over there to watch the practice for a while, and I was blown away by the size of this team. I knew they were going to be big, but some of those guards, how big they are, when we know last year they were very small. Good. I mean, Kendrick Davis was great, but he was diminutive. They have some size. That's the first thing I saw is how big this team is.
Yeah, backcourt-wise, they have some legit size. I actually initially was sitting there going, this team doesn't look very big.
Really?
Yeah, and part of that is because I'm biased because I've been around NBA guys for so long, and it's like hard to. No, seriously, it's like
Right.
it's two different worlds totally. But then I started watching them scrimmage, and watch some of those guys move and everything, and then all of a sudden you realize that they got some length, not just height, and they got a little bit of beef, but more than anything, they got length on that team. And that maybe is what can go the farthest with them.
Well, when I saw David Jones, and then I saw Jaquan Walton, the transfer from Wichita State, who's a 6'7" wing, and more a 2-3 than a 3-4. And I saw his size. All I could think about was, again, last year, Kendrick Davis, Alex Lomax, those two guys on the court at the same time is about a small, again, effective at times. But if you're running into a bigger team, these guys are big. They got great size. I agree with you. The length of what they have. Jordan Brown in the middle brings, I think, a lot to the table. He can score. He can defend. Malco is back. You can use him at times for his physicality. He is a big guy. And I noticed he didn't have knee braces on, which was a good sign.
Either knee, yep.
You have, as I mentioned, I think David Jones, when it's all said and done, and this is a lofty statement, maybe the best of what they got in the portal. And again, that's saying a lot because they got everything from the portal. Everybody but two, in Malcolm Dandridge and Jaden Hardaway. Everybody else was the portal or, of course, high school guys.
Yeah. Quinterly was the one who impressed me. I mean, that kid he can get in the lane now. And they were going up and down. They're all running the floor hard, but man, Quinterly can take the ball to the basket.
He's shifty.
He's shifty. You can tell he's a facilitator who loves to score, and that could end up being a really nice thing for them. Walton could be. I mean, and I agree with you on David Jones. He looked impressive too, but Walton was fantastic. Well, Walton got asked. So into the game, who's getting the ball? Who's taking final shot? And his immediate answer was me. And then there was a follow-up question of, well, what's the play going to be? And he goes, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially he said, ISO, me.
Give me the ball, get out of my way. I don't know if it's always going to be like that because they're going to have a lot of options.
They do.
Caleb Mills was not practicing yesterday, but nothing serious. And it's not only options on who's going to be on the floor at the end of the game, who's going to take the big shot, but also who's going to be in the rotation. And I know with Coach Hardaway, there have been a couple of years with his team, not last year, but where he played a lot of guys. And by the end of the year, he was saying, I got to shrink my rotation. Mm-hmm. There are going to be some quality players, Tim, that are either going to be outside the rotation or at times outside the rotation, maybe in and out, because I can't imagine he's going to go 12, 13 deep in a game, but he has that type of quality and he has that type of depth that if he had to, he could.
I asked him about that after you and I were talking about it on the sideline, and he said he's going to be very open-minded about going deep rotation with this team, but it's not just because they got a bunch of new faces. In his words, paraphrasing, but in his words, it's because they got a lot of really good players, and I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest strengths of this team is the depth. That last season, especially when Dandridge was having issues and DeAndre Williams was having foul trouble and all that, they did not have a very deep team. But I think he's got a way deeper team this season.
Also, the school released a statement about Mikey Williams, that he's still technically on the roster, but has to go through his legal situation, which he's back in court. I guess it's next week. I think October 5th. He has to go through that. I just don't see it happening. Do you?
I don't at this point, unless that kid comes up with some really good lawyering and that attorney can negotiate some sort of plea deal that 6 felonies are knocked down to a couple of misdemeanors or some nolo contendere plea or something.
Hard to believe that would happen, and they're not going to drop. They're not going to drop the suit. There's no way.
And Penny Hardaway was asked about, well, maybe even next season. Do you see it possible? And he kind of gave a little bit of a shoulder shrug, like, I don't know what's going to happen. You just got to see how it plays out on court. And the dang thing has gotten delayed how many times now? So who knows when there's truly going to be any resolution to all of that, because that's just 3 delays on a preliminary hearing, let alone a full, if it were to go to trial and all of that. So I don't think Tiger fans should count on seeing Mikey Williams at this point. But this way, I think there's a much greater chance of them seeing DeAndre Williams play for the Tigers in 23-24 than there is Mikey Williams. Mm-hmm. And it might be slim on DeAndre Williams at this point, unless something changes in that whole scenario with their appeal for the extra year of eligibility.
Right. And by the way, it's not a lawsuit. It's criminal charges, obviously, against Mikey Williams. And with DeAndre Williams, I know Penny said that he expects to hear something very soon. You never know with the NCAA.
Yeah, probably 4 games into the season.
Yes, and the way they've been turning down these waivers, you're right. The odds are probably not good for DeAndre, but what an extra added addition that would be if they got him back, because he would be one of the top forwards in the country, not just in the American Conference, I think in the entire country. All right, Tim, thank you so much.
You got it, Greg.
Again, thanks to Frank Bonner for joining us. Next week, we're going to mix it up. We're going to talk football. We're going to recap Boise State with Frank. And Parthu Upadhyay will join us as well to talk more in depth about Memphis Tigers basketball. So this has been the Daily Memphian Tigers Podcast. Thanks for joining us for this second edition after the relaunch of the Daily Memphian Tigers Podcast. In future episodes, you can expect to hear more from Frank, as well as Parth, as I mentioned, and of course, more from Tim Buckley. Be sure to listen to other podcasts by the Daily Memphian, including our Grizzlies podcast, our food podcast, Sound Bites, and the Sidebar with Eric Barnes about local arts, culture, and everything in between. Thanks for joining us, folks.